Okay, so remember that they are changing my voice. Now, I wrote a paper in 2022 titled My Characteristics. At the time, my top martial arts challenge at that time had been going on for 9 years. Okay, now it's 2025. So it's a little past the December point. So it's been going on for about a little over 11 years. The first point that I made in the paper was that my top martial arts challenge was part of who I am. And it was part of a series of challenges since at least May 4th, 2012, which is about 13 years ago. Okay, so I had a May 4th, 2012 challenge. Now, to understand me is key in this, and it's key in my arguments, because I argue that I'm the Messiah. So since I argue that I'm the Messiah, I have to explain that, right? That's not a claim you can just say. You can't just say, hey, I'm Jesus, and expect people to believe you. So I made a bunch of points to make it crystal clear that the overwhelmingly logical assumption is that I'm right, and it's a sound conclusion. It's the sound conclusion of a rational mind, and not the crazy saying of somebody who's out of touch or something. My second point is about my moral arguments. I've been making moral arguments on YouTube since 2009 in some form or fashion, and I put a real strong emphasis on it since 2012 at least. I talk about moral intensity and how it affects the brain function, which is a very important concept. As people are trying to better themselves, as they try to get good grades in school, as they try to do the right thing, as they try to be a better person, okay, brain activity and brain function are key in this. So, moral intensity increases sound judgment. We see people shrinking from this argument, especially in a crony capitalist society or a communist society that bans religion. We see that they shrink from the argument that moral intensity, according to the scientific studies, increase one's ability to make wise decisions. And because you see in the frontal lobe of the brain, that's where a lot of the decision making goes on in the brain. Judgment, decision making, motor movements, right? The frontal lobe. So as the brain cultivates the superior judgments that come as a result of being morally intense, the frontal lobe improves. And this is a part of martial arts, right? Mind, body, soul, spirit, where the brain has to evolve. The brain has to transform to make someone a very great martial artist. So that's my second point, is my moral intensity arguments. Is that moral intensity made me the top martial artist. It made me wise and insightful. It made me just and fair. It humbled me before the Lord, and it caused me to resist the propaganda and the philosophies of the adversaries. My third point is wisdom. To take the highest path while others merely use psychology and conform, or take a hermit path or a controlled opposition path. So I have the wisdom to walk in the light so that my deeds could be seen. Right? So it's the martial art challenge, it's the morality, it's the wisdom. These are key proofs. These are key proofs that don't depend on someone's interpretation of scripture. These are proofs that depend on someone's ability to think rationally, someone's ability to critically think, someone's ability to use reason, to live reason, to absorb and convey reason. My fourth point is my romantic justice arguments. This is a huge point. Huge point. I insist on romantic justice in its pure form. No perverted nonsense, no perverting the course of justice. True romantic justice. No controlled opposition rubbish. It sets me apart from so many people who refuse to talk about romantic justice. Now, to talk about romantic justice and to tell the truth about it, you've got to tell the truth about what's ideal. What's the ideal relationship? What's the ideal life? What's the ideal philosophy? Because we have to have a point of reference for how you treat each other. What is doing a woman right? What is a woman doing a man right? What should a family be? You have to answer these questions effectively, or else you're not going to have romantic justice. And romantic justice is extremely important, because God is a God of justice and God is love. And that includes romantic love, not just love for God and love for family, and love for your neighbor, but also romantic love. So to do God justice, you have to do the concept of romantic justice justice. And that leads me to my fifth point. Global justice, right? There needs to be a global war on poverty plan. People need to do for the least of their brethren, and they need to move masterfully as they do. See, wisdom calls out. Common sense is common, but wisdom is transcendent. Wisdom is divine. Morally precise wisdom is true wisdom. And so when we look at what should be done, how should we serve God, we have to look at the situation in the bigger picture and say what's going on in Palestine, in Yemen, in Somalia, and in South America, and on and on and on. We have to look at this situation and say, who are the least who are the most needy of the people? How can we help them and help everyone else at the same time? Because somebody who lives paycheck to paycheck, they might need help too, right? So you need to scramble with prudence and diligence. You need to be prudent. You need to run in the paths of God's commands, to scramble to help the poor. And that requires a sound and a cost-effective plan. You see, if you just fall in line with political groups, okay, nothing good ever happens. The Democrats are elected, Republicans are elected, nothing good happens. There's still tons of people who are poor. There's still 700,000 homeless people in the streets. 60% of Americans still live paycheck to paycheck. There's still a horrible lack of economic justice. And so people need to rally together to insist on a sound plan. There's, you see, a 10% redistribution plan over 30 years. If they redistributed just 10% of the wealth of the 22.5 millionaires and billionaires in America, over 30 years, and every country in the world did the same thing. And they passed a global farming plan. If they did these things, people would be fed. A global housing plan, small homes, tiny homes, cost effective, with the boundaries of cost effective spending applied masterfully. So that leads me to my sixth point. The most logical, universally great life view. So what is universally the greatest life possible? A morally precise life. Because righteousness is greater than wealth. Righteousness is greater than feeling like one's righteous while one's enjoying themselves. One has to be righteous in reality. So one has to present a universally sound argument for what is the greatest life. Which leads me to my seventh point. One has to be humble enough to accept persecution and to miss out on a lot of things. Dates, movies, music, parties, clubs, bars, etc. Right? All who wish to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. Why? Because when you insist on a sound plan to help the least of your brethren, what ends up happening is all the greedy people want to stop you. All the people in the housing industrial complex, if you will, in the military industrial complex, the oligarchs, the kleptocrats, they want to stop you. They want to prevent you from giving people the things they need to get their thoughts together and to make sound decisions for themselves and their families and their neighbors. They want to prevent you, and they want to bring you down. And they want to bring society down. They are sadistic on a spectrum. They don't have to be Marquis de Sade himself to be sadistic. It is sadistic to derive pleasure, out of someone else's suffering. It is sadistic to exploit the labor force. It is sadistic to turn your back on people who are dying in the streets because you're pursuing your own kind of selfish goals, relatively selfish if for nothing else. And that leads me to my eighth point. With evolution, tech, breeding, cheating, and generational ill-gotten gains considered, that the idea of the top martial artist pinnacle, they can never surpass me fair and square. They're like Tanya Harding at best, sabotaging Nancy Kerrigan. They can never truly ascend to the martial art throne to a way that's equal or greater than the way I have. And I don't say this to brag and be cocky and be arrogant. I don't like arrogant people any more than the next person does. I say this because one has to put a lamp on its stand. Okay, my top martial artist victory is the greatest human victory ever possible. And that means that God set me apart as the greatest leader ever possible. That's why in sparring it's called the lead hand of sparring, right? To spar it, to spar it, the spirit. The word champion, right? To be a champion of God, Psalm 18, Psalm 19. The champion of God is the warrior who God's trained for battle. And you don't want to actually, kill people or something. You can prove the same point that David proved against Goliath in outdoor sparring. Okay, so the government likes to make it harder for me to talk. The government likes to make it harder for me to articulate my points because they have no viable counter-argument. Anyone who's been listening to my videos long enough knows that I articulate myself masterfully, naturally. So why all of a sudden, after years and years of making videos, in the last 4 or 5 years or so, is it so hard for me to articulate myself? When I have 23 witnesses to the sabotage campaign against me. The people who work for the government, they fume me. The people who work for the government, they poison me. Because I've proven that righteousness is greater than wealth. I've proven that God exists. And that for those who don't have the ability to truly understand every last one of my points, they have the ability to understand the argument of the most logical assumption. In order to get someone to obey God, I don't have to prove to them that God exists to a T. All I have to do is prove it's the most logical assumption in regards to how you should live your life. The burden of proof is on the people who cannot prove that their philosophy and their life path is the most logical assumption about how one should live their life. Okay? Why should you live your life in a way that's inferior? When I've proven definitively that the most logical assumption is universal pinpoint and moral precision. That's how one should live their life. Even if it kills them, even if it gets them persecuted, even if it gets them sabotaged. The best years of my life are when I rose up to a T to be morally precise. They weren't my years in high school or, when I was a kid or whenever. It's when I truly grasped moral precision as a man. No matter how much persecution I faced, the joy of serving God transcended the downside of serving God. The joy of serving God is greater than the pleasure that one has when they don't serve God. When one is morally precise, they rise to the top. When one is morally precise, they succeed. When one is morally precise, they absorb morality and convey it. It's even absorbed into their genes. So my 9th point is my point about the most intensely moral person ever possible. See Psalm 18, Psalm 19, Proverbs 4:18, right? The path of the righteous is like the morning sun, shining ever brighter to the full light of day. Okay. So my 10th point is the most morally precise person ever known and logically ever possible. Again, think martial arts sparring, brain function, universal pinpoint and moral precision, and focus moral intensity. Okay? That's what makes someone the most morally precise or the most intensely moral. It's conveying these things from their heart in a way that goes beyond drawing, in a way that goes beyond anything that you know. Point number 11 is I didn't shrink to conform. Point number 12, Proverbs 13:6, righteousness guards a person of integrity, but wickedness overthrows the sinner. Point number 13, sharp. See, these are the characteristics that I have, right? Sharp, analytical, discerning, romantic. Point number 14, mature, deep, loving, caring, loyal, dedicated, determined, heart of gold, priority straight, logical, strategic, etc. Right? It's in these characteristics that we see the differences between people. It's in these characteristics that we understand what we should do and what we shouldn't do. Who's doing what and why? But what are their characteristics? We got to understand who they are in the first place, and we need characteristics to understand who they are in the first place. Point number 15. It alludes to martial arts when we see the word, the phrase, penetrating intelligence, piercing intelligence, right? A piercing intellect. Okay, it's clear cut. It strikes you as true. These are all phrases that allude to martial arts. Clear cut, strikes you as true, piercing intelligence, penetrating intelligence. And that connects to existential intelligence, spatial intelligence, logical, mathematical, intrapersonal, bodily kinesthetic. Leads to my 16th point. the top martial artist ever by default, right? It has to do with the insistence, the response, and responsibility, the apparent, the moral clarity and the moral vision. Now, again, the government's making it harder for me to talk. They use all kinds of technology and stuff of that nature. It's easier for me to write this stuff down, but they're suppressing my videos. They're suppressing my Facebook. They're suppressing me. And it's illegal. The president even wrote an executive order that said that they're not supposed to persecute Christians, but they're persecuting me still. Liberals and Democrats and Republicans alike. They're violating the executive order from the president to stop persecuting me, to stop persecuting Christians, and they keep doing it. They keep the organized harassment and the fuming and the poisoning. See, they don't obey their own laws. Should we be surprised when those people who don't obey their own laws don't obey the laws of God? And that's part of the difference. In fact, the word indifference is a play on words for indifference. The differences between people. Other people are indifferent to human suffering. They just become controlled opposition or directly the aggressor. Well, I tell the truth as uncontrolled opposition. And that's why it's so important for me to, it's so important to list my characteristics, because people don't understand the difference between what I'm doing and what the controlled opposition guys are doing. What I'm doing and what the con man who's trying to get people's money is doing. They don't understand the difference. They don't understand that the people who worship the devil have blinded the minds of people using technology and military-grade psychology. So they don't hear the truth about God. So they don't see the truth. So they don't have discernment. So they don't choose the right path. That's why the word consent has the word con in it. Because they're lying to them. They're lying to them in an elaborate manner. They're in cahoots with each other. It's a concerted effort. And they're lying to them in an elaborate manner as a result of a very meticulously planned process to mislead them. And there's no excuse for it whatsoever. People with PhDs shouldn't be getting together to trick people who are like in junior high and high school and college and so on and so forth. Okay? They use their understanding of psychology and science to get people to do things they otherwise wouldn't do. And it affects what they buy. It affects who they date. It affects how they treat people. And we don't see people, it's not enough to point it out. One has to bring up the solution. And in the word solution, we see the word play. The soul you shun. And the soul, the S-O-L, I believe it's Spanish, it means the sun. The sun. The sun is the symbol of the bridegroom in Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. And it talks about how the sun is like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber. Coming out of his chamber. Rejoicing to run his course. A champion rejoicing to run his course. So the champion you shun is the solution. The soul you shun. The soul brother, the soul, the S-O-U-L and the S-O-L. And it's part of the wordplay. I can't stress that enough. In the wordplay is the design, the central organizing principles and the design of the governing class and their predecessors who have decided to play life as a game. In fact, the word game is the word mage scrambled. It's called an anagram. When you take the letters of a word and you rearrange them to make one or more words. The word game is the word mage scrambled, and the word image has the word mage in it and the word game. Because in a calculated manner, they have organized to deceive people. And the devil is the great deceiver. He's the great deceiver to keep you from being a believer. Rhyme and reason. The devil's also been described as a horny devil. So rape by deception is a key part of his plan. It's a very sensitive topic. People don't want to, it's very taboo for me to break down the words in regards to sexual immorality in public, but I have before. Because it's important. Because people are dying. Every day, 500 people die every single day in this country from drug overdoses, from suicide, from a lack of access to health care. 500 people a day. Heck, there's 5 people dying homeless in Los Angeles, in the LA area, every single day. 5 people. Why don't people care? They're like, yeah, whatever, I'm going about my day. Why won't they do what is precise? Why won't they rally for sound solutions and cost-effective spending to feed the poor, to house the poor? It can be done for close to nothing. Donald Trump added $8.4 trillion to the debt. If he just added $100 billion more, he could have built a million units for the homeless at $100,000 each. But he'd rather have kids in the street. There's 100,000 children in the street right now. 6,000 of them are estimated to be totally on their own. So why is this allowed? Why every time I go out and tell people, nobody does anything? Because they're being misled. If your leaders are so good, why haven't you rallied for cost-effective solutions to end homelessness and to end child hunger? Because your leaders are organized devils. They refuse to do what is right. They refuse the correction and instruction from their conscience that comes from God that is telling them to do what's right. And as a result, people are dying in the streets. As a result, people are dying from a lack of access to affordable health care. As a result, the greedy are massacring the poor. What they're doing is like putting a bunch of poor people on an assembly line. And as they roll around, as they go into the machine, they get chopped up and they get thrown into the blender, 500 a day. They are murdering 500 people every day from their indifference, from their apathy. That's why the word apathetic is a play on words for alpha pathetic, because the one they follow is leading them to hell. In fact, the word lead is the word deal scramble. They made a deal with the devil by following wicked people, because when you follow wicked people, you become wicked. No servant can be greater. So if you've committed to a course of following wicked people and coming into the groups that the government wants you to, then you're complicit. You're part and parcel with the massacre of people, of those 500 people that die every day of drug overdoses, suicides, and a lack of access to quality health care. And why do people put up with it? Why do people choose to self-indulge instead of doing what's right? Because you have a crony capitalist system. You don't have a moral system. You have a crony capital order, social order. You don't have a moral order. You don't have a moral, mental, spiritual, and romantic order. You have a crazy order. You are fugitives running away from morality. You have rejected the moral truths that would correct you and send you on the right path. The answer isn't to try to salvage the existing order. The answer is to purify your hearts and your souls and to create a moral order. Proverbs 16:12 says the throne is established in righteousness. New Living Translation, justice. Proverbs 16:10 says the divine verdict is on the lips of a king. The divine verdict, a righteous order, a moral order, an order of justice, an order of moral maturity, an order of moral conviction, an order of moral will. When one doesn't have a moral will, when one doesn't commit to a morally precise course, they have committed to being slack in their work. Proverbs 18:9, one who's slack in their work is brother to one who destroys. So people are therefore being destroyers. They are brother to the devil. They are the children of the devil. Their inclinations lead them astray. And these things also separate me from other people. I'm just going to shoot through the rest of my points real fast here. I do a fair comparison. I compare the deeds and the works. Think about the concentration camp effect. I don't say, hey, look at me while sabotaging somebody. I don't do that. I don't do what Tanya Harding did. I talk about economic disparity in a way that is logical, in a way that if people really took it to heart, that it would bring about solutions. I talk about the significance of the phrase low down, dirty, and no good. Okay, I talk about the significance of the phrase blood money. I talk about the difference between working your way up from the bottom and having privilege. Other people neglect these things. When you put them all together, they're not doing it all together. These things are connected. I talk about, okay, so let me just leave it there. That's pretty much all I need to go over to cover my characteristics. Well, it's very, very unfortunate that this is the situation. My phone memory is going to run low, and so I'm going to have to stop right here for now.